Gavin, it's your old advisor, Darrin. This is the only way I could find to get a hold of you through the podcast. Quit bad-mouthing camels. Have me on for a episode about camels. Or you could have me on as an episode on advising graduate students or something like that. But anyway, the big one, have me on for camels. Quit bad-mouthing camels. Enjoying the podcast. Talk to you soon.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 65 of I Wish You Were Dead, a podcast about things that used to be alive. My name is Mike, and that is Gavin. And Gavin, we have another guest this week.
We sure do. It's weird. It seems that anytime we have guests, they're always back to back.
This is true. This is a thing with us, but, you know.
Yeah,
I'm pretty happy with the guest that we have.
Yeah, me too. This week, we are very pleased to be joined by my former grad school advisor, Dr. Darrin Pagnac. Hello, Darrin.
Hello, Gavin. Hello, Mike.
It's great to have you here.
Yeah. So many listeners may be wondering, or if you're familiar with the podcast, you might already know why Darrin's here. And you may notice a link down in the show notes saying to leave us a voice message. Darrin discovered that option for us.
Before we did.
So crafty. Mike and I had no idea that was a thing. And until Mike texted me one night being like, hey, so we have a voicemail, I guess? And
it's from this dude named Darrin, says he knows you or something. And
I was like, oh, weird. Okay, so we listened to it. And I tried to find the exact episode where Mike and I talked about it, but I couldn't find it. Because traffic was really bad getting to the hotel. But the gist of the message was in response to me saying how much I don't like camels. And Darrin didn't seem to like that. And he told me in a variety of ways to stop bad-mouthing camels. No uncertain terms at all. So,
Gavin, you learned a lot from me in your time at the School of Mines. I don't know, you learned you can never take enough field notes.
Yeah.
You learned to never trust specimen IDs.
That's true.
I think you learned that your hate makes you powerful.
It sure does.
But the hate to camels, I don't understand. All right. You don't direct your hate toward camels, Gavin.
We will get into a little bit more about camels after we do Today in History, because I'm going to break down exactly why, just a refresher for anybody who doesn't remember. I'm sure we have so many people who have listened to every second of this podcast who might not remember why I dislike camels, but we're going to start this off with a Today in History. So, Mike, what have you got for us?
So before I even do that, I just want to say that clearly the easiest way to get on this podcast is to tell us that you think Gavin's wrong about something. So
that is absolutely true.
Absolutely. Yep.
So you want a little cheat code? There you go. Going to be real quick Today in History. Going to be a downer because, why not? In 2014, Malaysian Airlines flight MH370 disappeared.
Oh, yeah. I remember that.
Yeah. I remember that.
Yeah. Remember how CNN had just a 24/7, that's all they did was cover that plane for.
Yeah.
It felt like weeks or months.
Mm-hmm.
So and surprise, it's been 8 years. So
yeah.
Wow, what a trip. I remember that.
What a trip for them, especially.
Well, okay.
You said it.
Okay, Mike. But you're right. That was literally everywhere. I remember for a solid 2-week, 3-week period where there was nothing on social media besides that.
Yeah, it was definitely just a wild kind of story, because it was how do you lose a plane? And everyone, knew what they were talking about. It was it's a big ocean, It's it's less crazy than it sounds. And I believe some wreckage of that. I actually watched a video on this just coincidentally not too long ago. Some wreckage has been found washed up at different places. So
yeah, it has been. Yeah, they're pretty certain it is from that flight. Yeah,
gotcha.
Perfect. So there is, I guess, some amount of closure for the families and everything. But yeah, so that was 8 years ago today was that flight disappeared. And there is, it is some great reading if you ever have a chance to go look into it.
Interesting.
That's all I have for today in history because I want to give us as much time as possible to talk about camels. So with that, I'm mostly going to be in the background for this one. I'm going to let the student and the master go ahead and just have at it for most of this. So take it away, guys.
Sure. So, the reason why I don't remember exactly how I phrased it, but it mostly came down to their taxonomy not being good, or their phylogeny.
What does that even mean? What does that even mean? Their taxonomy's not good.
Much like camels, it misbehaves.
Yes. So I got really spoiled in that the main group that I worked with for my master's thesis was horses. And while there are some problems still within horses and how the different species are related to one another, that's mostly what I mean when I'm saying their taxonomy and their phylogeny, how the different species are related. In horses, that is really well resolved. There's still some problems, but compared to almost any other group of animals you can look at, we understand horses really well. However, in my thesis, there were some specimens from camels. And the more I read, the more I was like, do we understand anything about camels? And
did you come up with an answer to that question?
I mean, well, obviously, yes, we understand things about camels. But the biggest thing was that in mammals, you can pretty much tell, if you know what you're looking for and you're familiar enough with a group, if you have even like a single tooth of a mammal, you can pretty much tell what species it is, especially if it's like a molar or sometimes a premolar. And especially for horses, super easy with horses. Camels, less easy, so I found, because from everything that I was reading was like sometimes closely related groups will have very different teeth, or what we think are closely related groups, and sometimes groups that are less closely related will have more similar teeth in ways that don't make sense with how we think they're related. And while that wasn't at all the point of my thesis, it really bothered me. So that was my biggest gripe about camels. So,
and I understand where Gavin is coming from in terms of his hatred of camels. As I said before, everything about camels is ornery. Everything about camels is cantankerous, from their current attitude to their phylogeny to their ecology. Everything about them is awful. And one of the things that I think Gavin ran into was that one of the problems that he ran into was, like he said, these horse teeth are great. You can get things down to like the species sometimes with one horse tooth. Horse taxonomy is tight. It's very well resolved. Not only is camel taxonomy not very well resolved, but in order to really identify a camel, you pretty much need a whole skull.
Yeah.
And everything behind the skull is pretty much worthless. So you cannot really do much of it at all. You kind of need a whole skull. And if you know anything about the fossil record, you know that whole skulls aren't terribly common.
Now,
so
why is it
you
that
get
you need,
these.
Why is it that you need a whole skull? Like, is this a problem with humans and our ability to classify things? Is this a problem with just like the fossil record, or is this a problem with just like camels and the way they're designed?
So it really does have to do with the fact that camel genera are sort of diagnosed by the co-occurrence of a number of different characters, like the number of incisors they have, the shape of their canines, their premolars, and their last incisor, the shape of their molder. And you need all these things together in order to identify them. So you can't identify a camel from like an isolated tooth, or you can't, from a partial skull. You need like the whole skull, because you have to have all these things occurring together in one skull in order to really get an ID. And so what happens is you get, like at Gavin's thesis site, you get all these partial bits of camel skulls, but it's not enough for you to really identify them and really get an idea of the different types of camels that are at the site. So you basically had a whole bunch of material that's just identified as camel.
Yeah.
And you can't really do much with it. It's very frustrating.
Yeah, and one of the things that also kind of bothered me about my thesis was how unreasonably confident people in the past had been with the specimens from my site. Because a lot of the teeth, there were, a whole bunch of boxes that were just labeled, camel, or especially with any, limb bones, those were, there's no chance of, identifying those. But even with a couple of limb bones, they were on the tag. It said, this genus or this genus, just because it was really big and there were only really two, really big camels in the area at the time. So it's like probably one of these two, but it's like, you don't know that. There could be a third one that we just haven't found yet. But they
part of that
that
issue, Gavin, was that part of that issue was when the last time someone really took a look at your site, there weren't as many camels known.
Right.
There weren't as many different types of camels. So you could say, well, it's a big camel or a small camel, and that was good enough. Now, when you came back, we've got, 12, 16 different types of camels from your time period. So the taxonomy has gotten a lot more complicated, and you need a whole skull in order to identify these things.
And that change has happened over how many years?
30, I think.
Yeah, I mean, just based on a lot of the sources that I cited for my thesis, that sounds about right.
Yep.
But what was that one, at least that there was like some kind of reasoning for, calling that one of those two genera. But a lot of teeth, just isolated teeth, were referred to a genus, or in a couple of cases, even a species. And the sort of methodology that I approached my thesis with was, if I look at a specimen and I can tell for sure that it's not that, I change it. But if I don't know for sure, I leave it as is. So a lot of those camel teeth were, if I had just picked that up off the ground, I would just call that camel tooth. But because somebody had already named it that, I left it as is. And that was just sort of the methodology I was using, but not how I would have done it if I had found all those bones myself. But that is, in general, like I said, sort of the problem that I have with camels. But we're here to talk more about the actual animals themselves than we are about my personal issues.
Gavin, I'll talk about your personal issues all you want.
I know you would, Mike. You're a good friend.
I mean, Darrin, same offer goes for you. I know we don't really know each other, but if you got something you want to bring up, like, we can hash it out here.
Well, no, actually, we could both talk about Gavin's personal issues if
yes,
you wanted.
Yeah.
So tag team. So
not live, not on air. But so Darrin, let's talk about
folks.
camels.
Just so you know, we edited out about 30 minutes of Gavin asking us about what we should do with his fiance and what needs to happen and everything. So.
Mike, you and I both know that we do not edit this podcast.
Good to know. True. Good to know.
So
we're live.
What? I guess since we've been talking about camels for the last, almost 15 minutes, what is a camel? You're the taking over as the content expert for this episode, Darrin. So, what is a camel?
Well, you know what? I'm gonna go with tradition and throw it back at Mike.
Oh, damn it!
All right.
Damn it! I thought I was getting out of this one.
Absolutely not. Nope.
So this is how we know that Darrin is one of the 6 listeners, 6 regular listeners to this podcast.
Hey, no, our analytics show we have more than that. Don't discredit us, Mike.
Yeah, okay. Okay. So for those of you that don't know, whenever we're talking about a new whatever, in general, Gavin, or in this case, Darrin, will ask me to describe it as best I can. And it sounds like a lot of fun and really easy until you're the one that has to do it. So camels. They are, I'm going to say they're mammals, because they're hairy everywhere. I'm assuming
they are indeed mammals. Yes.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay. They do, they either don't need a whole lot of water or they're really efficient with the amount of water they use, because they tend to be used in desert environments, like Egypt, or for a brief period of time, the southwestern United States.
Absolutely, which we'll hear more about later.
Which that'll be my small contribution to this podcast. I'm trying to think I'm trying to think of what else is uniquely to camels. Obviously, you've got the humps. I'm not really sure how to categorize that or classify that.
So
But
would it help you if I threw you a couple more animals that are closely related that I'm sure you're not thinking of?
sure. I mean, like the one animal I'm thinking of, Gavin, like you mentioned already, is a horse. Just because 4 legs, reasonably tall, can be ridden. That's the one animal that I'm thinking of. What else am I not thinking of?
So the family of camels, Camelidae, which is broadly probably what we end up talking about today,
Yep.
also today includes llamas and alpacas, as well as what most people think of as camels. So
Okay, llamas, alpacas, and camels. I'm not gonna lie, it doesn't really help me at all.
okay,
Trying to figure out what on earth a camel is. I feel like a camel is, um, again, this is as frequently we'll go here. I'll get the broad idea right, but not the scientific basis. It is a reasonably large mammal that can be ridden for long periods of time without the need for a consistent water break or needing to consume water a whole lot. That's when I think of camel, and they're hairy. They have the humps. Um, when I hear a camel, that's generally what's in my head. And so I will end that diatribe there. And Darren, how did I do?
In terms of describing modern camels, you did very well. So,
Yeah.
Yep. The one humpers and two humpers, the Bactrian and dromedaries. Yes, you did quite well. So, so that is one half of like the modern camel lineage is the Bactrian camel that is native to northern China, Mongolia, that sort of thing, and then the dromedary, which is native to the sort of the Middle East. They had a wider range in the past through much more of Africa and that sort of thing, but that's you're pretty accurate for that side of the lineage. So camels are artiodactyls, meaning they have an even number of toes. They have a cloven foot,
Okay.
which means they're distantly related to cattle, antelope, deer, goats, that sort of thing. But that group is divided into basically primitive versus kind of derived things. And so the derived things in that group are like the deer, the cattle. You guys had a great episode on cattle. Those are pronghorn antelope that are very prevalent here in North America. And then the primitive group contains a lot of extinct organisms, but also things like peccaries, which are North America's answer to pigs, giraffes, hippos. So these are like really primitive artiodactyls, and camels fall into that group. So they fall into this sort of primitive artiodactyl group. And of course, as we alluded to, modern camels they're basically two different types. There's the camels from the Mideast, from Asia, that you're familiar with, and then there's llamas. And we find llamas, alpacas, guanacos, and vicuñas down in South America. And so they are camelids as well. They are sort of a different subset of camels that we know in terms of the stuff that we'd see out in the desert in the Middle East and that sort of thing. And these two lineages are the end of probably a 50 million year history, 45 to 50 million year history, the vast majority of which was only in North America.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're very much like horses in that way.
Yep.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite sort of fun facts is that a lot of the groups that like you think of as being very characteristic to other parts of the world today were much more common and did a lot of their evolutionary history here in North America. Like horses, camels, tapirs, rhinos, and but they're all locally extinct. With the exception of some released horses, and for a short period of time, some released camels.
Yep.
So
that was a question I was going to ask, just to clarify. So most of that evolution over the last 50 million years took place in North America, but by and large, we are not talking about any of that family still existing on this continent. Am I right?
Yeah, up until the end of the last ice age, camels were absolutely ubiquitous parts of North American faunas. Yep, you did not go that entire time without there being at least one camel. And at the end of the last ice age, we lost our last camels.
Okay.
But by that time, one group of the descendants had migrated over to Asia to become the camels we have today, and another group had migrated down to South America during that Great American Biotic Interchange that we talked about a little later, or a few episodes ago.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess let's take us back to sort of the start of that 50 million year history. Mm-hmm. So I guess what were some of the first camels like? What were they doing, and sort of when did they show up?
So in North America, the first camel that shows up is this thing called Poebratherium. And it was not very big. It was, the size of a large cat, small dog. And they're very common in the Badlands, in the White River group of South Dakota. And we get hints of them as far back as maybe 45 million years, but really they don't become common until the Oligocene at about 35 million years ago. But one of the cool things is that we know they're camels, right? We know they're camels because of a very unique feature. We know that the cloven-hoofed animals lose sort of their lateral digits, and they're basically walking on our middle finger and our ring finger. Well, any animal that has a cloven hoof like that, those distal toes split, but the bones in their hand and feet fuse up into one single bone. We call it a cannon bone. And so it's fused into one bone from the wrist all the way out to the knuckles. Camels have a very, very unique cannon bone. We call it a slingshot cannon bone, in that it starts as a fused unit, and then about 2/3 of the way down, it actually splits. So those toes on a camel actually start to split above the knuckle. And this is one of the reasons why when you look at a camel, you look at its foot, it has these really big pads. Mm-hmm. It has the space for those pads because those digits actually split above the knuckle. Yep.
Right, and that's something that I think a lot of people don't like. You look at a camel and you don't think that has like hooves in the same sense that like a cow does, just because their feet look structurally really differently. And like I really remember in our paleobiology class, the class that we had that you taught. Where we sort of learn all the different pieces of anatomy, particularly of mammals, because that's what we have a lot of on hand. But during the part, the lab where we were looking at camels, you ran down to the lab or to our collection space and grabbed one of these cannon bones of, was it Apicamelus?
No, it was probably like Megatylopus or something. It was something huge.
Yeah. But one of the really, really big ones, and yeah, you could use that as a slingshot pretty well.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that slingshot metapodial then splits their hooves above the knuckle, and they develop these pads. And it seems as if they develop these pads pretty early on. This is something that is sort of key to their adaptation. And so because of those, they are very good at adapting to moving around in a number of different environments, a number of different substrates and that sort of thing. Camels never get fast. Camels are never going to set any land speed records. But what camels do seem to do well very early on in their evolution is be able to walk at a pretty good pace for long distances.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I never really thought about it, because pretty much every larger group that I can think of has had some member that like adapted more toward faster running. Like even rhinos had some pretty quick members.
Yep.
And you definitely don't think of rhinos as being particularly speedy animals today, at least, as we know them today. But yeah, I guess I never really thought about that with camels, that that's just not something they ever did. They just tend to be pretty mellow, except when they're angry and spitting at you.
Exactly. Yep. Now there's a few exceptions that we'll maybe talk about in a bit. In the early Miocene, there were these Gazelle Camels that got a little fast, a little kind of jumpy. They were kind of like a little Thompson's gazelle. But for the most part, camels evolved to be able to walk good long distances. And one of the things that they also develop is a pacing gait. So they move the legs on the left side. They move those all at once, and then they move the right ones all at once. They move the left ones all at once. They move the right ones all at once. This is a unique gait that you don't see in a lot of other ungulates, these hoofed animals. And this evolves pretty quickly. And it's one of the reasons for their long-term success. And if you look back in history, one of the things, the camels were always called the ships of the desert for a number of reasons. But one of the supposed reasons was that when Europeans started riding these camels, because they walk with this pacing gait, they kind of sway back and forth. And Europeans got motion sick.
Interesting.
When they rode these camels. And up until that point, the only place you got motion sick was on a ship. So.
Yeah. I guess. Oh, go ahead, Mike.
Is there a particular advantage that having that gait where you move everything on the left side, then everything on the right side all at once? Like, is there any particular reason why that might be advantageous for camels instead of, moving kind of one foot at a time or alternating?
I'm not entirely certain. Now, I know you can train horses to run like that. They're called pacing horses. And I think it ends up being a bit more of an efficient gait in terms of you're able to maintain that gait for a lot longer. Also, I know that at least in horses, pacing horses kind of have a smoother ride in terms of kind of at like a trot, that sort of thing. But I think it's just kind of more of a more efficient gait for just traveling long distances.
Which is exactly what camels have been doing for, hundreds, thousands of years, I guess, at this point.
Millions at this point. Yep.
Understood.
Yep.
All right. So after we get some of these earliest ones and we start to see them sort of balloon a bit in their diversity in the Oligocene, what happens around then?
So camels experience about after the Oligocene, they experience 3 major diversification events. And one of the neat things about camels, one of the things that I like most about camels is that have you talked about disparity on the podcast? I don't think you have. You've talked about diversity. Passing. Yeah. Yep. So
I don't have a clue what that means. So if that helps.
All right. Cool. We'll go over it then. All right. So there's a couple of different ways in which we measure kind of the variation in fossil organisms. The first that you guys have talked about quite a bit is diversity. And diversity is the number of different types, number of genera, number of species, that sort of thing. The other way that we can sort of measure how many different kinds of animals there are is something called disparity. And disparity is basically different types of body plans, different types of morphologies. Do these organisms do a lot of different things in their body plans? And so Gavin's horses that he talked about in the Middle Miocene, horses are really, really, really diverse. There's a lot of different kinds of them, but they do not show a high level of disparity other than maybe in their teeth. But overall, a horse in the Miocene is a horse. They're all going to look pretty similar. Camels are really cool because not only do they show a high level of diversity, that there are a lot of kinds, but they show a high level of disparity too, meaning they assume all kinds of crazy different body shapes and sizes and that sort of thing to maximize sort of resource usage during their time period.
Is that part of why it's difficult to identify camels based on just like one tooth or with, a leg bone or something because they're so disparate?
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Absolutely. That is part of the problem. Yep. They're doing a lot of different things. Yep. And another big problem with camels is that, for example, camels in the early Miocene start to do one thing, and then camels in the late Miocene that are kind of completely unrelated to the early Miocene camels start to do the same thing. And so if you try and do like a phylogenetic analysis of these things, unrelated groups fall out as related. So I love to tell my students that camels are so ornery, they break cladistics. So cladistics doesn't work on them. That you can't even do phylogenetic trees on them. They're so ornery.
Yeah. And the few that I tried to look at just never came out pretty. because, all of the time, by definition, all species within a genus must be more closely related to each other than they are to a species that is not in the genus. That's how cladistics works. But man, every cladistic tree that I saw for camels broke up like every genus that they tried to put in the tree.
Yep.
So, and it's one of those things where it's like everybody kind of agrees, man, somebody should really figure out these camels. But then there's a lot of people who are like, somebody else will do it.
Or some idiot like me tries and throws their hand up. And when I was first proposing to try this, I would go to previous researchers who tried. I went to like basically 2 prior generations of paleontologists to say, well, do you think we could do a cladistic analysis on these things? And everyone was just like, good luck. Let me know how that works out for you. So, and now I tell subsequent generations the same thing. Good luck. Let me know how that works out for you. So, yeah.
Yeah. So I guess, what are some of these trends, I guess, since you mentioned them, that one group of camels starts doing, and then later another group completely unrelated starts doing the same thing? So what are some of these trends that camels do over and over?
So when we hit the Miocene about 20 million years ago, give or take, camels explode in North America. They go nuts, both in diversity and disparity. And one of the first groups of camels we get are these things I alluded to before called stinomylenes, which are these Gazelle Camels. And we get these preserved very commonly right in my neck of the woods here, just south of us in western South Dakota, or western Nebraska, at a great site called Agate Fossil Beds.
Yeah.
And these camels were literally like little antelope. They were like little Thompson's gazelles or something, minus the horns. Minus the horns. They were the spitting image of these little antelope from Africa. And we know they occurred in herds because we find their skeletons in these huge assemblages. And we think that they were also going about in like a kind of a semi-arid environment, but we don't think they had humps. The hump is probably a relatively new feature within camels. But they were these little kind of, you look at a Thompson's gazelle, a herd of Thompson's gazelle on a National Geographic special. That's basically what these little antelope camel or these gazelle camels were doing. The spitting image of these little gazelles. And then from there, camels just go nuts. All right. They do all kinds of stuff. So we get your run-of-the-mill camel from the Miocene then is going to kind of be like a llama, is going to be relatively similar in physical proportions to a llama. Maybe a little thinner and maybe able to move at a little faster pace, but they're going to be very similar in proportions to a llama. But from there, we do all kinds of different things. So we get these little camels like this thing called Paramyolabus. And I actually named a new species of Paramyolabus minutus, in my dissertation. And these were like tiny, tiny, tiny little deer. They were like itty bitty little deer.
Okay.
Tiny,
like,
tiny.
Talking the size
things.
of a dog, like the size of a hamster,
the size of a cat, like the size of a cat. Little tiny cat-like deer. Yep.
Which sounds really strange to us here in North America, but in basically every other continent, those are fairly common. There's lots of species of deer that are very small like that in Asia, South America, Africa. Yeah, so there's those. I actually can't think of any off the top of my head in Africa, but definitely for sure Asia.
Yeah,
and
there's
South America.
A few little ones in Africa.
But
in Asia, like the muntjac or.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
But yeah, so that might sound strange to our North American listeners, but that is not an unusual thing to have in an environment.
Yep. And so then you get some forms, things like Myolabus and Protolabus, that are kind of a little more like regular sized deer, bearing in mind, none of these things had antlers or horns or any of those things, but in terms of proportions, they come out fairly similar to maybe even a whitetail or a mule deer, probably doing somewhat similar things, that just not moving as fast. But then the big crazy ones that we develop in the middle Miocene are what we call giraffe camels. And these are things primarily like Epicamelus and Hesperocamelus. And these things basically became giraffes. So there were trees that were high, and so they developed long legs and long necks to reach the forage in the trees that was sort of up at height, just like modern giraffes do today. Mm-hmm. So total convergent evolution. Camels basically became giraffes for a brief period in the Miocene.
Right, and it's funny because I'm fairly sure, these days with camels, who knows, but I'm fairly sure this is no longer the case. But at least growing up, I had always sort of heard that camels' closest relatives are giraffes. And I don't believe that that's where we put camels these days. But
yeah, you could probably say that a camel's closest living relative is a giraffe. Right. That's probably fair to say. But the issue is that between camels and giraffes, there's a lot of extinct groups that kind of connect them up that are no longer with us. But
so in terms of living species, it sounds like camels are kind of on their own for the most part.
Yes, they are. They're kind of their own unique, irascible entity.
Yeah, because I think, other than the hippo whale lineage, they split from the other artiodactyls the earliest. So that's why they're so weird compared to the rest of the artiodactyls. Yeah, so
doing
I guess
their own thing from day one.
Yeah. So how big were some of these giraffe camels? Is it sort of just 1-for-1 with a giraffe, and proportions basically the same?
Yeah, some of the bigger ones you would get like 12, 15 feet, so comparable to a modern giraffe.
Okay.
Yep. And again, just like a giraffe, these long, lanky legs, this big old long neck. The main difference was that giraffes have this neck that kind of slopes down into their back. There's kind of a slope from the neck down to their tail. These camels would have had more of like a horizontal back, and then there may have been a bit more of like kind of a sinusoidal S curve to their neck. But still pretty much doing what giraffes do, eating off the treetops.
Neat. So that is around, like you said, the middle to later Miocene. So that's, just for reference for our listeners, that's roughly, 10-ish to the latest Miocene, was around 5-ish million years ago. And so after camels explode, take over North America, I guess sort of for our listeners, why around those times? Why during the Miocene, the later Oligocene? Why did camels sort of explode when they did? Because, very few things in evolution just sort of happen, So just like we've talked about with horses and cattle, they diversify at certain times for certain reasons. So why camels and why then?
So one of the parallels we draw with camels today is if we take a look at modern East Africa, what are some of the most diverse mammals we see in modern East Africa today?
That would probably be bovids, right?
Yes, all those antelope that we've already talked about: Thompson's gazelle, springbuck, wildebeest, all these things. Yep. And so what's happening in modern East Africa is it's sort of a kind of an open savanna type environment where you've got small copses of trees with more open scrubland in between it. This is an environment that supports very high diversity, but it's also an environment that supports a lot of different niches. And a niche is basically you can think of it as like an animal's job. This is what it does in the ecosystem. Some graze, some browse, some eat shrubs, that sort of thing. And the reason we have so many different kinds of antelope in East Africa today is because there's a lot of ecological opportunity for them to do a lot of things and assume a lot of different body types. Translate this back to North America in the Miocene. North America in the Miocene was basically East Africa. Very, very similar subtropical scrubland savanna sort of environment. And bovids weren't around yet. So these animals as a group weren't really around yet. They may have been just appearing in Asia, but they weren't around. And so the group that stepped up to do the bovid thing in North America were the camelids, were the camels. And so they assumed all these different roles because they were kind of you can kind of think of them as like the jack of all trades, in the sense that they assumed a lot of different ecological roles. And so that's sort of the secret to their diversity and their disparity. And that goes on throughout the Miocene until things begin to change.
Cool. And so I guess moving toward the modern times, what changed to make camels no longer suitable to be North America's, gazelles and wildebeests and stuff?
So what happened at the end of the Miocene was we moved out of this tropical sort of environment, and major changes in ocean circulation and atmospheric circulation basically transformed North America from a very tropical climate toward something that is more temperate, to something that is seasonal, with like a warm summer and a cool, snowy winter, perhaps. And this really causes a drop in the variability of niches, or the variability of ecological roles that organisms play. And this took place over the course of 4 or 5 million years, this transition. But as this transition goes from this tropical savanna, really up until the ice ages, we see camel diversity drop and drop and drop and drop and drop. And during that time period, we basically also see our two modern groups of camels pop up. So our modern camels become pretty prevalent, and we basically get giant versions of modern camels in North America today. So we get things like Megatylopus, Titanotylopus, Gigantocamelus, which were basically a dromedary camel, only 50% bigger. They were huge. Yep. And then long about 2 million years, they migrate across Alaska, over the Bering Land Strait, over to Europe, over to Asia, and become the Bactrian and dromedaries that we know and love today. And then that other group, the llamas, they sort of develop and diversify, and then they head south during the Great American Biotic Interchange, when South America connects with North America, and then they go south and do their llama, vicuña, alpaca thing down there. And these then populations that emigrated from North America, they sort of stuck around, and the last remaining camels by the end of the Ice Age died out by 9,000 years ago.
And what a shame that was.
It's true. Yeah. What a shame for everyone except Gavin.
Well, yeah. I mean, I just think seeing all these different, animals out native to when they were native to North America would have just been really cool. I think, I don't know how long they would have lasted after.
So you like them better alive than dead, is what you're trying to say.
Yeah, which is kind of goes against the theme of the podcast, I guess.
The premise of the podcast. Yep.
But but I mean, who knows how long they would have lasted once European folks got here.
True.
But,
yep. Well, and another thing is like camels actually did okay during the Ice Age. Modern Bactrian camels live in very seasonal conditions, and they do very well. Mongolia gets pretty cold in the winter. Yeah, center of the vast Asian continent. And so temperatures get very, very cold. Bactrian camels do fine. And back in the Pleistocene, we had these large camels, up by the Arctic Circle. So there were camels that at one point were adapted to cold, and the Bactrian camels are basically their descendants. They're the ones that are still pretty well adapted to cold. So camels did well. They right up until the end, they were adapting to a wide array of different environments.
Yeah, and they got caught up in the same thing that likely took out things like the mammoths and other large mammalian megafauna that we're still trying to exactly parse out how all of the large mammalian things went extinct toward the end of the Ice Age, whether it was climate stuff or humans or probably both. So that's, at least as I understand it. I don't know. There might be some timeline issues with camels that they might have gone extinct before humans got to North America here.
Yeah, it does kind of coincide. It does
Okay.
kind of coincide, although I don't know of any real evidence of humans hunting camels. I
Okay.
don't know of any evidence. We have evidence of humans hunting mammoths, here in
Right.
mammoths and bison and that sort of thing. If you go to the old world, particularly in Russia, we have evidence of humans hunting horses. Not so much in
Right.
North America, but we do have evidence of humans hunting horses. But there's no real correlation between human hunting and camels. So something else was going on, something else other than just human hunters hit this megafauna hard. And camels were one of the ones that, that went along with everything else.
And that pretty much brings us to the modern day. And
Exactly.
And I think Mike at this point might have a little story to tell us.
I mean, I'm not entirely sure it would be fair to say that I have a story to tell because I only became aware of this. I only became aware of this on the podcast. I have no idea what episode it was, but Gavin, you were the one that first introduced this to me.
I sure did, and I wish that I could remember. It was super early in the podcast. Mm-hmm. I don't remember at all what episode it was, but it was fairly early. But I guess take it away, Mike. Enrich us with this story.
So basically here, and I am not going to pretend as though I am some sort of expert on the subject. However, in the United States, in kind of the mid 1850s, there were a few people that were trying to figure out better ways to get around in the western, particularly the southwestern United States. And you can imagine this being a problem. You have a whole bunch of people from the East Coast. James K. Polk shows up. He expands the country by a whole bunch. And now you got all these big city East Coast guys that have no idea how to get around in the West. And
which is still true today.
It's true. Yep.
As an East Coast person who currently lives on the West Coast, yeah, I can confirm.
Right. And to paraphrase one of my favorite comedians, they could have used the Native Americans to help, but they killed them instead of asking them for help to get around. So
it's true. Yep.
Yeah.
They needed to have some way to try and get around in the southwestern United States. And when you look at this, the one name that comes up over and over again, which to me is just hilarious in a terrible kind of way, is a guy named Jefferson Davis.
No.
Does that name mean anything to either of you guys?
It sure does.
It sure does.
Jefferson Davis. What is he most famous for?
A little flag that we see a lot these days in modern society.
Although I haven't seen one since I've moved out to California, which is
you haven't?
I'm sure
okay.
they're here.
All right.
But anyway, we're alluding to, I believe Jefferson Davis was the president of the Confederacy.
He was.
That is correct.
Okay, I couldn't remember if he was president or vice president.
No, a different guy. I believe the vice president was Alexander Stevens, I want to say.
That sounds right.
Who was another flaming racist. But before Jefferson Davis went on to great infamy as president of the Confederacy, he was a senator, and then he was Secretary of War, today Secretary of Defense. He was in charge of the United States military, which is just wild for a guy that would go on to be the president of the Confederacy. And he got obsessed with this idea. In the 1850s, he becomes Secretary of War in, I believe it is 1854, I want to say. 1853, he becomes Secretary of War. He is able to get the funding from camels. There are a couple of ships that are sent across the Atlantic Ocean to pick up camels, I believe, from Egypt. They are brought over, and they are used in the southwestern United States to go around to for different kinds of missions to basically help people in the Southwest, navigate and learn that terrain a lot better. And it seems like a program that actually would have, I don't want to say would have, could have gone on very well, except for the fact that the Civil War broke out shortly thereafter.
Yep.
And once the Civil War breaks out, the program was partially abandoned, in part because, some of the generals that were in charge of these camels were Confederates. and so the program sort of fell into disrepair. And by, I believe it was 1866, so just a year after the Civil War officially ends, the Camel Corps was disbanded, and those camels were often sold off. And so the way this was phrased to me by Gavin, however many episodes ago, was the United States employed war camels for a short period of time in the military until they became not so helpful in trying to defeat the Confederacy.
Yeah, I mean,
to be fair, Go ahead, Gavin. Yep.
I was just to say, I mean, that's as far as I knew, there were, Union soldiers who rode camels into battle, which I don't think actually happened, but man, what a sight.
Absolutely.
I don't want to pretend like it didn't happen. I'm not an expert, but the program itself, during the Civil War, people had like bigger things going on.
Oh, yeah.
Also, the Southwest was its whole different thing during the Civil War. People were more focused on, again, a little East Coast bias there.
Yeah, for the most part, they were used as pack animals, I think. I don't think there was a lot of actual riding of these camels. I think they were used as pack animals. And I think another reason why the program didn't take off was because the cavalry just couldn't handle the camel's attitude. They were just, compared to horses, they were just awful to deal with. So, yes, the running theme is camels are jerks.
And so, I mean, is that part of the reason why, like horses became so dominant as the animal to ride and everything, just because they were an easier animal to deal with? Or does it have more to do with the fact that horses can run faster? Or like, what is there a particular reason why humans, at least in North America, have selected for horses over camels?
It probably has to do with the fact that, one, yes, horses probably do have a better temperament. Two, horses can survive in a wider range of environments than other critters, and they are probably the most efficient running mammals, and also the ones that are the best capable of carrying loads. Now, camels are great in arid conditions, but they're not terribly fast, and again, they're a pain in the butt to deal with.
Gotcha. Yeah, I would also argue probably where they were originally domesticated also has a big thing to do with it.
Yes. Yep.
Because, horses were domesticated depending on, where the research is currently at, somewhere in like Eastern Europe, Western Asia. And camels, I honestly, if you would tell me that like, hey, they're just tamed camels, not like truly domesticated camels, I'd believe it, given how mean they are. So I don't even know if there are technically domesticated camels.
Actually, in terms of the dromedaries, I don't think there are any wild populations left anymore.
Oh, interesting.
I think dromedaries are pretty much all domesticated now. But with camels, there were two centers of domestication, independent. There was the Middle East, and then, of course, there was the Bactrians in northern China, Mongolia.
Right.
So what is the state of camels today? So the U.S. Camel Corps, that is, going on 150 years ago now. Where are camels typically seen today? What are they used for? I know there's sort of these stereotypical, camels are in, the Sahara Desert that we get from, probably at least semi-racist cartoons. At least that's in my head. Where do we see camels today?
That's pretty much going to be the thing. Your dromedary camels are going to be a source of transportation, pack animals in the North African, Middle Eastern desert. I think there is some use of camel furs and hide, and I even think sometimes the milk is drunk from camels.
I believe there are also camel pageants that I've heard about in various countries in the Middle East.
You're right. Yep, there is. Yep.
Camel pageants?
Like camel 4-H. Yeah.
Or effectively like, horse shows, cow shows, but for camels.
Yep. And then, of course, llamas down in South America are doing their own thing, but we have domesticated one form of llama, the alpaca. And primarily, we're using it's wool. Essentially, it's wool, and alpaca wool is gorgeous. I mean, it is soft. It is wonderful. Mm-hmm. It's fantastic, and great sort of little bit of party trivia. Out here in Wyoming, a lot of sheep herders, you would think that they might put a big dog out in their sheep herds to keep away the coyotes. No, they throw a llama into their sheep herds because,
Really?
yes, because again, ornery SOBs, they will not take anything off a coyote. And a llama is much, much more effective at chasing off a coyote than a dog is. So out here, it's a pretty common sight to see a herd of sheep with a llama in the middle of it.
Wow.
I just imagine a big
worth it to see.
White cloud of fluffy sheep with one just big long neck sticking out of the middle of it, swiveling around looking at stuff.
Yep. And they all do spit. They all spit.
We said we've domesticated this one, these alpacas. Are their temperaments better than camels? Or what is the deal with that?
Yeah, so alpacas are kind of cool, actually. They actually make reasonably good pets. I know a couple people here in the hills who have alpacas, and they use them as pack animals when they go hiking. They'll have them carry the gear in the water and that sort of stuff.
Oh, cool.
And so they're pretty decent. They're pretty chill. They're not like dogs in the sense that they'll cuddle up and like to be petted and that sort of thing. But they get along with humans, and they're a little better. They'll still get a little ornery and spit at you every now and then, but the alpacas, I think, are a lot better than your sort of wild camels.
That is awesome to think about, and just awesome to picture. Just like going up on a hike, just a nice couple day hike with some alpacas.
Yep, they put saddlebags on them, and and they're really chill. They're just like, yeah, okay, we'll hang out. Yep.
It's funny. So, I've been on a decent number of hikes or different, at least trails and things out here in California, and everybody and their brother brings their dog.
Yeah.
And I can only imagine the looks I would get from LA people who have their little dog with them on the hike. I'm me just being dragged along by my pack alpaca up the trail to the top of the mountain.
That would be fantastic. It would be wonderful.
That'd be wonderful. And this episode has been wonderful. Is there anything left to be said about camels? Anything, Gavin, do you have any defenses for your position? Have you been persuaded that camels are actually cool? What is there left to be said about camels here at the tail end of this episode?
I mean, I've always thought camels were interesting. I still don't particularly like them. But that kind of goes with everything with bad taxonomy, which is, frankly, a lot of groups. But I do appreciate them ever so slightly more. So I guess you kind of did your job today, Darrin.
Excellent. Well, and one of the things we can leave you with is that, while camel taxonomy is an absolute mess, one of the things that we're finding camels very useful for is interpreting paleoecology, because they're doing all these different things and assuming all these different body plans and stuff. We can actually interpret a lot about the environment based on the camels. So they're telling them apart is a mess, but if we interpret what they were doing, that can tell us a lot about the environment. That's the real beauty of camels.
The real beauty of camels, that might have to be the episode title.
You took words out of my mouth. That was the real beauty of camels, featuring Darrin.
I am a wordsmith.
Thank you very much, Darrin, for joining on this episode. This was a ton of fun, and if hopefully you get pissed off at Gavin at some point again, and we can have you back on the podcast to
absolutely.
To set him straight.
There's plenty that I could get pissed off at Gavin about. Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us. This has been episode 65 of I Wish You Were Dead, a podcast about things that used to be alive. My name is Mike. That is Gavin. And Darrin, thank you very much for joining us. We'll see you guys next week with episode 66. Take care, everybody.
Thank you for having me. This was a blast.